They were the most unstoppable sound on earth. Three brothers, one unmistakable harmony, and a string of hits so powerful they rewrote the DNA of pop music. But just as they reached the height of fame, they vanished. Not because they lost their talent, not because the fans moved on, but because radio, the very system that made them kings, turned its back. They weren't just forgotten, they were silenced. This is the real story of how the Bee Gees, the architects of the disco era, were quietly banned from the airwaves, while their songs continued to dominate the charts, just not in their own voices. If you love uncovering the lost truths behind music's biggest legends, you're in the right place. Hit subscribe, tap that bell, and drop a comment below if you think the Bee Gees never got the respect they deserved. Now let's rewind the tape to the moment when pop royalty was forced underground. By the end of 1978, the Bee Gees weren't just popular, they were untouchable. Staying alive,
Staying alive, staying alive. Feel the city breaking and everybody shaking to the stage.
Night Fever,
We know how to do it.
How Deep Is Your Love?
You need to show how deep is your love.
Their music had become the heartbeat of a global movement, and much of that success came from one seismic event, the release of Saturday Night Fever. The film's soundtrack, which featured multiple Bee Gees hits, sold over 40 million copies and became one of the best-selling albums of all time. At one point, the brothers had 6 songs in the U.S. top 10 simultaneously, a feat only rivaled by the Beatles. But their success wasn't just personal. The Gibb brothers wrote chart-topping tracks for other artists too. Emotion by Samantha Sang,
And who is the one you
If I Can't Have You by Yvonne Elliman, Grease by Frankie Valli,
throw away? Originality belongs to yesterday.
More Than a Woman by Tavares,
More than a woman.
each one crafted in the same hit-making machine that powered the Bee Gees. They weren't just performers, they were the engine of late 70s pop. And then came the backlash. It didn't happen overnight. But by mid-1979, the disco dream had curdled into a nightmare. A growing segment of rock fans, many of them white, male, and angry, began to revolt against the glittery, inclusive energy of disco. They mocked its fashion, dismissed its musicality, and started campaigns to wipe it off the air. At first it was subtle. Radio programmers shifting playlists, DJs cracking jokes, but then came Disco Demolition Night, the moment it all exploded. On July 12, 1979, Chicago's Comiskey Park hosted a bizarre baseball promotion. Fans were invited to bring disco records to be blown up on the field. Organizers expected a few thousand. Over 50,000 showed up. Fires were lit, records burned, and the field was stormed. The game was canceled. The message was unmistakable: disco sucks. But this wasn't just about music. As cultural historians have since noted, the anti-disco movement was laced with racism, sexism, and homophobia. Disco had been born in Black, Latino, and gay nightclubs. To its critics, it represented everything they feared. And who was the biggest face of disco? The Bee Gees. Even though the brothers themselves weren't from the dance club scene, even though their early music had more in common with Beatles ballads than funk, they were now branded with a scarlet D for disco. And the industry responded. There was no official memo, no government order, no public boycott. But starting in 1979 and accelerating into the early 80s, radio stopped playing the Bee Gees. Program directors quietly took their records out of rotation. New singles were ignored. And suddenly, one of the most successful acts in music history was gone from the airwaves. Their 1981 single, He's a Liar,
And it's not how I want it to be. As I have no
a sharp rock-influenced track, barely cracked the top 30, not because it wasn't good, but because most radio stations refused to play it. Even Living Eyes, a 1981 album that steered clear of disco entirely, was shut out.
If I told you your tomorrow is my yesterday.
Barry Gibb later reflected on this era, saying, "We were being punished for the music we had made, even though people still loved it. Radio wanted nothing to do with us." The Bee Gees weren't fading, they were being muted. And here's where the story turns surreal. While the Bee Gees were being locked out of radio, their songwriting never stopped winning. They pivoted into the shadows, writing hits for others. Woman in Love for Barbra Streisand.
On the wall, I stumble and fall, but I give you.
Number 1 in 1980. Islands in the Stream for Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton.
From one lover to another.
Number 1 in 1983. Heartbreaker for Dionne Warwick. Chain Reaction for Diana Ross. Each song penned by the Gibb brothers, each song a smash. But the voices were different. The names on the charts weren't Bee Gees anymore, they were ghostwriters for the biggest stars in the world. It was a quiet rebellion, and a brilliant one. The industry could try to erase their faces, but it couldn't erase their talent. The Bee Gees found a way to stay on top without ever being seen. Despite their resilience, the rejection stung. Maurice Gibb once said, "We never expected to be hated just for making people dance." And that's what it boiled down to. They became scapegoats for a genre war, a movement that turned on itself. Their name became a liability. Even as their music kept climbing the charts through other artists, the Bee Gees brand was considered radio poison. Years later, their contributions were quietly reassessed. They were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1997. Their influence on pop structure, harmony, and production became undeniable. And after Maurice's death in 2003 and Robin's in 2012, the world began to reflect. Too late. Let's be clear, the Bee Gees were not one-hit wonders. They weren't a passing fad. They were visionaries who adapted again and again. From Beatles-style harmonies in the 60s to orchestral ballads in the early 70s, to dance floor dominance in the disco era, to hidden masterminds in the 80s, they evolved, they survived, and they outlasted nearly everyone who doubted them. But their story remains one of the most ironic in music history, banned from radio, while their songs kept topping the charts, just under someone else's name, a quiet injustice, a forgotten truth. And now, a legacy finally being heard. If this story left you stunned, you're not alone. Music history is full of genius that got lost in the noise. But here on RetroWaves, we bring those stories back. Drop a comment if you remember the moment the Bee Gees disappeared from your radio, or if you grew up wondering why your parents loved them so much. And if you haven't yet, hit subscribe, because the stories they tried to erase are the ones worth remembering.